more than half, but I think we need to make a start because we don't want to run late uh, today. Um, Again, I cannot make you turn your cameras on, but if you can turn them on, it would be great. Otherwise, we're just talking to an empty, dark screen. Frankly, it's not very engaging, and I need to today ask you things. You will produce things. You will do bits of work on your laptops, and you will also comment on some things. So we expect a little bit more participation today than in previous seminar. So if it is possible, please turn your cameras on so I can see you. Um, okay, that's two of you at least. Well done, guys. um, we'll see what happens later on. I hope no one's like attending this like from like from bed or something like that. Let's keep it professional, but hopefully at some point I'll see you guys during the day. Oh, William, you're right. Um, okay, so let's start. So I guess the first thing to say, guys, obviously, I'm really sorry I was unable to schedule this session. It seems for our school seems to be very difficult to find a quiet place where we can look at a screen and you guys can sit and take notes. There are lots of messy places and noisy places on campus, as you already know, like studios and common areas, but for today, this is a follow-up seminar for your theory work. So I need you guys to actually take some notes and do some work and sit and spend a bit of quiet time in front of a few slides. And it seems like there wasn't any space available, which was appropriate to do that for today. So I really wanted to be there today, but definitely will be there for next tutorial because as far as slides go, today's our last session, and from today, we will start actually talking to you one to one about your literature reviews. So um, the next one will be in person, hopefully before everyone disappears in a couple of weeks. Um, so that's the first thing. The second thing, how was your midterm review last week?
Sorry, too much work.
Well, the work you will do in theory will not now, not yet, so don't worry too much about it. But in the future, we'll start linking with what you're doing in design, right? We will look
Mm.
into those connections in terms of how theory informs design and how what you do in design helps you think about what you're doing in theory as well. So I don't need to be in your presentations or in your crits. I don't need to add more pressure to you guys when you present your work, but it's usually quite helpful for me to just have a sense of what you're doing and how you're doing and the comments that you're receiving. So if I can help keep track of what you're doing in design, that will help our tutorials as we move on. So I'm not asking in a way that needs to be negative, and I'm not assessing you in any way, obviously design wise. I just want to have a sense of how are you guys doing. So is it going all right? Was it a tough review? You didn't look very happy when I asked about it, so I'm just checking in with you.
Okay, for the midterm, I think we were getting positive feedback, but it's just a work in progress currently. So
Yeah.
nothing really decided, but we kind of have our own system in a sense that we know our directions to develop. But yeah, nothing solid yet.
Okay, but what about the feedback that you receive? Are you making progress? Are you lost? Do you feel confident on the work so far? Do you feel like you might be missing something or missing some help? Is there anything that we can do on the theory front, for example, to inform or support your work, or are you okay with that?
For that part, not sure yet. We haven't really gathered after the midterm. We've been taking days off.
Okay. Um, Well, I mean, I think that's fine. As the same as every master's program ever, by the way. You usually start a bit lost, trying to make sense of different tools, of your group, of your reading, settling in. the program, and things become clearer as you go. So I wouldn't be like too worried about it. Clarity comes with time. But if there's anything we can do from the theory side of things to help you maybe think a bit more strategically about your design, or maybe some bits of reading that might be helpful for you in terms of articulating what you're doing with a bit more clarity, we can obviously pick that up, and happy to kind of help with that. I'm not a design tutor for you guys, but obviously I'm an architect, I'm a designer as well. So anything I can help, just feel free to ask anytime. Um, okay. So for today, we are going to catch up with two seminars. So originally, from the calendar I shared with you, we had one scheduled for last week, right? I didn't do that last week because typically students either don't show up or show up with very little reading because you're all busy with your midterm design review. So I decided to move it to this week. However, for this week, I've condensated the two seminars we have left. One is about presenting your research, another one is about research methods. So we will now catch up with everything you need to know, basically, as far as seminars are concerned, with the content that you require to kickstart your literature review. So it's a pile of slides. I have tried to condensate it so we don't make it like too slide heavy, really. But it is content that we do need to deliver. Links will be available there for you. Some more literature will be suggested there as well for you to keep reading, and hopefully to start shaping your literature review. So at the end of today, well, at the end of the session today, not at the end of the day, but in an hour and a half or so, you will have to produce a little text with a diagram of what you've been reading and send it to me to prep for our next tutorial. So you will have an actual concrete deliverable from today that you will have to produce, so I'm aware of what you're reading, what you're not reading, where are the gaps, and how can I prepare myself to have a chat with you in our next tutorial. Okay? So I hope you have been reading, because otherwise you're gonna get in trouble today. and and I hope that what you have been reading in some way makes some sense, right? You don't have to start writing yet. Maybe you're still a bit confused about what to write about. Maybe you have found some bits that are interesting or more interesting than others, but you don't know yet how to start the literature review. That's perfectly fine. Um, and it's really not a problem. I will help you with that, but to that we need to kickstart the work so far. Okay, so have you been reading? I can only see three people on the screen. Yeah, if I cannot see you on the screen, you can do the thumbs up thing on Zoom. Have you been reading? Okay, William, yes. Sijian,
Yes,
yes.
yes,
It's
yes.
good. Okay, I'm a bit worried about the ones that are not saying anything right now. Okay, cool. Thanks, Susan. Um, have you been reading material from the reading list, or have you been going in your own direction? Like, you know what, I found this interesting, so I follow this kind of rabbit hole of literature, and I've been mixing stuff from the reading list with my own interest, or just a reading list. What have you been reading?
For me, I read from the reading list initially and then trying to understand some of the directions, and I
Okay.
found generally the automated future might be more interesting. Like somehow I found a small link between the one that talks about digital productions with one of the Walter Benjamin's writing, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, because they kind of
Okay.
talk about the same thing or the same problem caused by the new technology in a sense. But Walter Benjamin was discussing more about the artwork and photography and filming, these categories. But it's kind of a continuous route to the current digital production of 3D printing and things like that. And yeah, I then dive more into kind of Grammaziel Collar. Is that how to pronounce his name? His idea of pushing this idea of automated future one step
Okay.
further. So I'm just mixing this stuff. I'm seeing connections, but I don't know how to form an essay on this
That's
currently.
perfectly fine. I think we're going to cover some content today that might help you a little bit with that. But it's
Thank
good
you.
that you have identified things and you're identifying or thinking a little bit about where your interests are. So maybe you don't know yet how to, shape that
Yeah,
into a literature review, but you feel like the literature is pulling you in some direction, which
yeah.
I think is quite um, okay. While I start talking, by the way, if any of you has a question or you have a comment about things you've been reading or your intended topic so far, or maybe if you found something interesting in the reading list that you might want to share, feel free to add it in the chat window and I will pick it up as we go through the slides. But I really, really want to hear from you guys today. I really want you to share with me what you've been reading, what you find interesting. Again, I'm not assessing you, but this is for me to have an idea of what you are doing basically and the directions that you are thinking of for your literature review. So feel free to drop some comment. If you want to chat between yourselves in the chat window while I speak, that's also perfectly fine. I read something interesting. That's good. Feel free to share. This seminar should be about you guys telling us what you've been reading and us reflecting together and discussing what you've been reading. That's what seminars are for. Otherwise, it's just a lecture, really. And this is why we needed like a quiet space where we could meet and talk, obviously, which seemed to be a problem in Gordon Street. Um, so for now, I'm going to start with another one of our slide decks. It's not a big thing really, but we need to cover that obviously, and hopefully, as you said, William, will give you a bit of a direction in terms of how you can start articulating what you've been reading onto a text. So I'm going to share my screen now, but I have the chat window open on a second screen. So if you want to add any chat message here, I will read it. I will be able to react to that fairly quickly. Um, so if you remember, our first seminar was about how to access research literature, right? We talk about things like search engine. We talk about things like insightful. We talk about things like how to use AI to navigate literature. There acceptable uses and not so acceptable uses of AI. But we went through that because it's important that you're aware of that. It's important that you find the
Yeah.
best possible way to make that useful for your work. Sorry, I think there's an open microphone somewhere. I'm gonna yeah, I'm just muting all of you. Um, but if you have a question, feel free to just give a shout or put it on the chat window. Okay. So now the talks we're going to have today are two. Basically, we're catching up with two seminars. It's more like one and a half seminar really. One is about research methods or practices, how you can approach your literature review, basically how you can start articulating what you have been reading onto a narrative that makes some sense and how that will become eventually your literature review, but also in the future your dissertation. And then um, the second presentation we're going to see today is more about how to communicate your research, a few writing techniques that you can use to kickstart your writing. So, from a quick show of thumbs up, who has been already writing something? Who's already drafting or moving forward with your literature review? No? Okay, it's fine if you haven't, but it's not so fine, right? Because obviously you have a submission coming up in January, but I'm going to help you today kickstart that process, and there is some work that you will have to do today. Basically, this is predicated on the basis that I know design has been keeping you busy, guys, okay? But you have already 3 weeks of reading time. So this is now the time to start writing. Please don't, and I'm telling you now in advance, well in advance, please do not consider writing as something you do whenever you have any time left. Reading and writing should be almost like a parallel process to your design, right? You have new design ideas, you learn new skills, you make new design decisions, you go and write about them in relation to the literature you've been reading. It doesn't have to be a lot of writing. It doesn't have to be in-depth writing. It could be just little notes. It could be 100 words a day. That's like a little paragraph. It doesn't have to be a lot of work, really, but consider theory and writing and reflecting about your reading as something that contributes to your design, not as a separate thing, right? If your brain is working on design mode all the time and you do not engage with literature as you go, you're going to find yourself in January not having a literature review and not being able to submit on time, or you're going to have a really good design submission, but a really deficient literature review that is going to pull your grade down anyway, right? But if you consider them as an integrated thing, right, that benefits each other, right? Design can benefit you're thinking about literature and the way you're engaging with literature, but also what you read can also make stronger and inform what you're doing in design. That's the best possible scenario. That's what we want to see from you, really. So even though you might not have been writing your literature review yet, hopefully you have at least some notes, some summaries, some ideas drafted down somewhere that can become a starting point, right? So what I'm going to tell you today is hopefully that how to kickstart that process, right? Um, Nothing in the chat window? No. Okay. Um, so there are many ways in which you can articulate your literature review and many ways in which this might become your dissertation over time. And this is one of the big challenges that students tend to have at this point in time. So the usual concern, I don't know if I'm reflecting what you're thinking now, but the usual concern is I've been reading all this, I've been reading a pile of books, a pile of papers. I know roughly what I'm more interested in, but I'm not sure how to start articulating that. What is the approach I'm going to take? What is the way in which I'm going to put this together in a way that is meaningful to me? The reason to do that is because there are many ways to communicate research and communicate your literature review, but they're already established in the field, right? Um, so you could do, for example, historical research. You could do, for example, theoretical research or cross-disciplinary research. And all these lists that I'm listing now, I'm going to discuss them one by one for you. Um, they all have established ways in which they happen in the literature, right? So if you want to do a case study research, well, there are books about case study research you can follow, actually. There are books and examples that you can take in terms of how to best structure practice-based research or case study research and whatnot. So what you need to choose today, well, maybe not today, but today you will draft it at least, um, is which one of these strands, which one of these directions you would like to take for your own research, right? There might be overlaps between them. You sometimes we have students looking at case studies from historical perspectives, for example. So you might have like a bit of an overlap between two of these approaches, but at least try to make a choice today. Maybe a preliminary one. It might evolve over time anyway. Don't worry too much about it. But based on this, you will have some additional references you can consult, and you might.
你要化妆吗？
Sorry, Yiquan, I can hear you now. Was that a question, or was your microphone just open now? Okay, I'm gonna mute you then. Oh, I cannot mute you. Okay. Um, Okay, so these are some options. These are not all the options, but usually dissertations stay in this space, right? Uh, One really good book by Linda Groth, Architectural Research Methods. A lot of that is fairly technical, though. A lot about a kind of environmental performance research and things like that, which is not really what is bringing us together in this module. But said that, it's a good reference book. Um, and obviously, there is this very well-known book by Ray Lucas about research methods in architecture. That these two books, by the way, they have different chapters, so they have an overview of many different methods and different approaches in which you can talk about your research and your literature reviews, right? So there's no one single one-size-fits-all kind of solution for that. Um, Right. And obviously, the research really broadly can be seen in many different perspectives. So it can be either quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative is when we quantify things and we make sense of uh, discrete things like data, like measuring something, right? Whereas qualitative is more about the qualities, sometimes the subjective or interpretive qualities of something, right? Usually historical theoretical research is qualitative, although sometimes you can talk about quantitative things in in qualitative ways, right? For example, I can talk about environmental building performance from a quite qualitative perspective. I can talk about the history of environmental performance, for example. So you can talk about things which are quantitative in qualitative ways. And usually, that's one way to classify research. And then the other one is whether you use primary or secondary sources, right? By now, you are doing a literature review, which means you are building something with secondary sources. You are leaning on things that have been already published, things that have been already said by others. So you are agglomerating that and reading on that and making sense of what others have published already. So your literature review is that it's a series of sources. So it's secondary research, right? You're not generating your own data. You're not writing a paper yourselves yet. You are talking about the work of others. Whereas primary data is usually data that you generate yourselves. You are measuring something, you're studying something yourself, you're analyzing a case study from a novel perspective and whatnot. Or, like in your case, you are doing your own design project and then talking about it. That's primary data. You are generating that yourself. You're not talking about the work of others, you're talking about your own work, right? So typically, a literature review will be secondary data. You're building from the work of others, and it's also qualitative. You're talking about the qualities of that field, right, or that literature review. Although, as you move on and you start developing your design, you kind of transition into that sort of primary data space, right? So typically, a final dissertation submission is qualitative and makes use of some primary data. So at the moment, you are working on the bottom right quadrant, right, qualitative secondary data, and you will move throughout this year into the top right quadrant typically, right? That's the usual student trajectory in this course, right? So let's start with the different categories. Historical research. Historical research can be actually quite interesting. I think we don't do enough of it. It's quite nice, particularly, well, you can talk not only about the past, but maybe if you talk about the future, you could say there is an historical element to that as well. You're thinking about time, you're thinking about ways in which time influences the way we conceptualize or the way we think about architecture. It's not always historical research about talking about the past in this kind of boring, old fashioned ways, as some students might see, but sometimes you can see, for example, you can think about how a concept has changed over time, right? That is historical research as well. You're historically contextualizing something. Maybe you're thinking about how a concept is likely to change in the future. William, you were saying something about automated futures, for example. So if there is an element of time in that research, maybe it's historical. Because you're considering the history of something, right? On the way you develop a concept or the way you look at a specific phenomena or a specific technology or a specific mode of production, like 3D printing, for example. So historical research is not always talking about the past. It's more about looking at the way something changes over time. And this book, Deliverance, is just a wonderful book about the home. And actually, obviously, is very narrative. It's about a specific person, a specific story about someone walking around London streets. And obviously, through that narrative, what this book is telling us is the conceptualization of home, right? In this case, in late 17th century London, so sorry, 19th century London. So it's a really beautiful book that, through the use of narrative, it makes an historical account of the concept of home in London at the time. So it's a beautiful book. I suggest you read it anyway. But historical research has to do with that. It could be narrative, it could be playful. It doesn't have to be these boring historical reviews, um, but it has to do with the passage of time, obviously, and the way certain concepts evolve and change during that time. Um, Obviously, in Deliverance, they talk about home in more detail, and there is a section about the materiality of the home and how it has changed in 100 years between 1850 and 1950, which is obviously a very significant time for home in the UK because of the world wars and stuff like that. So it is a really interesting period of time to look at. But again, it doesn't have to be this dry historical review, right? You can be also quite playful, and you might end up with a really, really interesting, compelling historical approach for your topic if that's something you wish to do, right? There are many ways to deliver historical research. Again, it's not only about chronologies, which is the way we usually, like the way time passes, basically, is not always about that. You can also think about fact finding, kind of detective like stories, references, mapping, how opinions have changed over time, for example. And you can look into not just what is happening in your mind, what you're thinking about a topic, but also you can think about issues like historical accuracy as something that you might wish to discuss, historical logics, compilation of a topic over time as well. There is a lot of literature on that in architectural research as well, where you can verify a fact, something that has been assumed in the past to be a fact. You can actually verify and validate it under more contemporary literature. So there is so many ways in which you can approach historical research that I think could become, for some of you, if you like to think about history or time, you can obviously think about an historical approach as something that could be a quite interesting way to deliver your literature review. This reference by Jacques Sparson, the modern researcher, is really interesting. By the way, it talks about what they call in this table the tactical concerns in historical research. So again, what are the tactics and the methods and the tools we have to deliver research in these spaces? So if you want to have a little bit of a closer look at this reference, also a really good source. And here comes theoretical research, right? Usually, most of our dissertations we see in this module are either historical or theoretical in nature. That's not the only way to be critical, but obviously, this is a module that deals with history and theory of architecture. So we see a lot of historical and theoretical work. Theoretical research, it doesn't have to be philosophical, by the way. There's usually this image that theory is this really complicated philosophical field. um, Whereas that's not the case. The objective of theory is actually establish fundamental views about how we act in the world. It has to do with concepts or relationships between concepts, such as frameworks, for example. Um, and it has to do with logical argumentation and theoretical thinking, right? In any design you do and in any research project you do, you deal with concepts, right? There are key words. For example, if you talk about the future, going back to what William said before, for example, if you talk about technologies in the future, you need to define certain concepts, and those are fundamental truths about the way we see our own research topic. That's an element of theoretical research. So please don't feel like this notion of argumentation or theorization is this really complicated philosophical thing. A really good example is the work of Ray Lucas around research methods for architecture, and he has some really nice work, by the way, done about explaining in very didactic ways theory of architecture. And obviously, you have books which are more contemporary takes on philosophy and theory for architecture students like Deleuze and Guattari. They are very kind of well-known authors of the postmodern design movement, and they can obviously feed into that discussion if this is a trajectory you wish to take, right? Um, the house construction actually comes from the work that Ray Lucas presents on his book, but he talks about ways to approach theoretical approximations to research topics or logical inquiry around these topics, like the material, the formal, the efficient, and causal relationships, right? So there are ways in which you can structure a narrative around theoretical research that, again, they're not complicated, but they are about logical thinking, and they are about you building a stream of arguments that is able to follow and articulate kind of that line of research, right? So I'm not going to read all this now, but it is there available on the slides for you to read later. This is a fun one, cross-disciplinary research. Sometimes we have students in very early stages of their work that do have an interest in cross-disciplinary research. They do things like I'm interested. I'm obviously interested in architecture because I'm doing this program, but I'm also interested in geography. I'm interested in technology. I'm interested in other fields which are not architectural per se, but I would like to cross that gap. I would like to really do a piece of research that deals with both architectural elements as well as other disciplines like technological elements, STEM fields, anthropology, cultural studies, sociology, and so on. Or maybe you have some techniques in mind already. Like, I don't know yet what I want to do, but I really like anthropology. I like to observe situations and places and people, and I think I would like to learn from that and kind of problematize and write about it in my dissertation. So maybe you are in that gap in between architecture and anthropology, for example. So um, I'm not saying you have to do it, but I usually add this here because sometimes we have students thinking about like this is not very architectural. Is it right? Is it not right? It's usually right. It's usually fine as soon as you're able to define why you're doing cross-disciplinary research and the impact and the methods and the approaches that you need to articulate for that. So this is a space that has been fairly developed. This is an example of cross-disciplinary research, which is the cross between architecture, geography, and anthropology, right? Space and culture, and it has to do with the understanding of culture as something that has a reflection in the space. Spatializing culture, space is not really something that contains things, but also something that roots and grounds what culture is. Is probably a narrative that started in the 1980s, and again, it doesn't talk about location as an abstract thing, but it's about a site and it's about a place where culture happens, where social practices happen, and it's much more complex than just seeing space as a container of things, right? Um, and again, a lot of really interesting writing about that. Cethan Lowe on Specializing Culture is a really nice book to read anyway. I would suggest you have a look at that nonetheless, especially because you are looking at technological cultures, right? And I think you might have a really interesting things to say about that.
Can I have a look?
Non-representational,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. Sorry to cut you.
no,
I just
yes,
have a
jump in.
more question for this disciplinary research. So, as you mentioned before, that this needs to be linked to our design topics as well. But let's say if we decided to approach it in this way, and then now talking about maybe currently with, if, for example, if I'm thinking for something about my architecture linked with culture, linked with a certain culture or certain kind of
Mm.
problems, but then in my design it doesn't it changed completely, and then it doesn't really reflect on this. Then what shall we do in that case?
I would just go and do it. um,
Okay.
the reason for that is that your research evolves over time, as well as your design. So you might have
Mm,
already an expectation of what to do about your design, and we will adjust as we go, basically. And then
mm,
your literature review might open up to acknowledge new fields or new areas of inquiry. Or as you keep reading throughout the year, you will realize like, oh, this is actually quite interesting and relevant to what I'm doing, and you
mm,
will then adopt that. So I don't. Well, the first thing to say, your literature review in January does not need to be linked to your design,
mm. Okay.
right? That's one
Mm,
thing. What needs
mm,
to be linked to your design is your dissertation that comes later. I like to raise this as a topic now because
mm,
if you're not assessed about it now in January, but at least you have a sense of what's coming, so you can prepare and future-proof your literature review. But we can always adjust. Your research will evolve over time in the same way your design will evolve over time. We have had some students that have had to adapt things a little bit. We have had students that sometimes decide to keep going and really find more in-depth links with literature. We have had students that quite late in semester two decide to change their topic because they realize that your design thinking has been taking you in a different direction and they want to kind of reconcile those different views. So
mm,
that's fine. I think that for now, really show me where your interests are. I find this interesting. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure how this is going to look like in my design, but this is something that seems to be particularly relevant and interesting to me at the moment, and that's perfectly fine and legitimate. And we will help you articulate that as we go. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you.
Susan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question about
Sure.
choosing the topic because in the last lecture, you kind of gave us three different genres to look at: socio-material theory, critical making, and automated futures. But now, in the slide, it says that we can do some cross-disciplinary research. So, does the cross-disciplinary research have to be under these three categories, or can we basically just choose whatever topic we're interested in?
Well, Yeah, that's a good question. Sorry if I didn't spend a lot of time going back to the previous presentation actually, but these are not topics, right? What I'm presenting now, these are ways to talk about a topic. So you can talk about automated futures in cross-disciplinary ways. You can talk about automated futures doing from an historical perspective or a theoretical perspective. These are ways, these are approaches in which you can articulate your research. These are not research topics, right? So if you have been reading work around, let's say, automated futures to say something, or social material theory, you could approach that from an historical research perspective, from a theoretical research perspective, from a cross-disciplinary research perspective, from an anthropological research perspective, and so on, right? So these are not topics, Susan. These are ways in which you can articulate that research space for you. But you can talk about social material theory in any of these ways. You can talk about automated futures in any of these ways as well. So this is an exercise that we do at this point because probably you have been reading, hopefully, about things like, let's say, automated futures. You feel like that's something you kind of maybe like, maybe literature. You feel like it's pulling you in that direction, but now you need to start writing about it, and you need a way to write about it. And this, what I'm telling you now, are ways to write about it, right? Did that clarify your question?
Yes, so what I'm understanding is that these three topics are a big umbrella, and then within that, in the ways that you're showing now, there's more specific things we can talk
You
about.
could you could consider it that way if you feel like you've been reading enough to consider those topics to be bigger umbrella topics, let's say, for your research. But actually, we're going to have a little writing exercise at the end of this presentation where you will actually tell me what is it that you want to do, and we're going to use that to discuss further, actually. So then you can add that content right there.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, sorry, I didn't. So yeah, you could talk about things like social material theory from cross-disciplinary perspective. You could talk about the anthropological cultural implications of social material theory, for example, or the automation of the future and whatnot. So this is again just one example, one way in which you can establish yourself as a cross-disciplinary researcher. Obviously, there is also observational work embedded here that usually comes up in your design work as well. You go and look at a site, you go and look at a community, or you go and look at a group of people, for example, and you inform your design that way. So ethnography, right, observing people and societies and groups, it usually becomes part of students' research. There are really interesting ways to look at that. One of the best books you can really check on this, I suggest for your design, you check it anyway, is William White's book on the social life of small urban spaces. It's all about how do we look at space, how do we look at urban space, and how do we look at the dynamics of the way we occupy, the materials, the conventions, and the interactions that happen in those spaces. So I think you could inform your design in quite strong, robust ways by looking at this. And again, you could talk about the automation of the future from a perspective of small urban spaces, for example, or you could talk about social material theory from this perspective as well. There are some other methods that are a bit more out there, but sometimes students like to explore these spaces. So I've added that there. One is visual methods. Again, this is about exploring a topic through visual means, and that involves research through tools and techniques, for example, photography or film or other forms of media. So again, you could investigate, Susan, things like automated futures from a visual perspective, from the perspective of the use of photography, the use of film, how these new spaces emerge through the use of through the study of different kind of media landscapes, or participatory action research. I'm not going to research this topic by myself. I'm going to research this with others. I'm going to do a focus group with other designers. I'm going to ask people about their insights. I'm going to really work with the social groups involved in my own research, and I'm going to allow them to participate in the way I build my literature review, right? So this is a bit more time consuming, of course, but it's also very rewarding. And then you're starting to get primary data that feeds into your work as well, right? Because you're talking to people, collecting information that will contribute to make your research even stronger. A lot of the research I do myself, by the way, is participatory in nature and is about automated futures. It's about how technology can help us envision and imagine better futures and development for local communities. And I do so in participatory way. So we ask people about things, we set up events, we set up workshops, and we work with them on collectively, right, establishing that research territory. Mapping is also a really interesting technique to think about space from an observational perspective or an anthropological perspective. I think for you that could be quite an interesting technique as well if you're thinking about mapping a situation. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about my research, but I'm thinking about mapping a space, mapping a social convention, mapping the way certain group lives or works or moves around the city. So mapping could be a really interesting technique, not literally as in cartographic mapping, but architectural, conceptual, theoretical mapping as well. And there are some classics there that, again, this will really contribute to your design possibly. So you might want to check them anyway. Kevin Lynch, The Image of the City, really great book to think about very fundamental concepts of mapping, like edges, pathways, nodes, landmarks, and stuff like that. Like it's really good to have a way to conceptualize and talk about really basic urban principles. Um, Stan Allen, Points and Lines, it's a beautiful book about diagramming in the city and really what diagrams mean and how what do we use them for. Again, I think it could inform your design practice really well, but maybe you can also use this as a research technique, right? I'm going to go and investigate a site from a mapping perspective. I'm going to use Stan Allen as a reference for that. And obviously, a big one is the Manhattan transcripts by Bernard Shume when he talks about the theory of the event, the theory of emergence, for example. And the Manhattan transcripts are a really interesting one, not only because of its theoretical weight. You know, they're very kind of well-known books in architectural theory, but also the way he looks at maps are very creative. He makes a mix of film and photography and sketching, so there is an element of media involved, and there is certainly an element of how do we look at space in ways that are not just through standard, let's say, through standard architectural representation, really, in a more kind of experimental, open-ended way. So mapping could be a tool that you use to explore your given topic as well. I'm not going to detail this too much. Practice-based research is a different approach. It has to do with contextualizing your research in the work you are doing. Usually, this has to do with methods of research that are about designing, like experimenting with representation methods, model making, stuff like that. You will have an element of practice-based research because you will have to link your work eventually with your design, but that comes in semester two. So I'm not going to talk too much about this, apart from the fact that, again, whenever you read something interesting, maybe try to think about how that might contribute to your design work. And whenever you make some progress in your design work, also think about, right, how do I see this? How can I think about this from the perspective of what I've been reading? If you make annotations and keep track of those thoughts, that's fine, but I'm not going to detail this too much um, now. But one interesting thing that you might want to consider is the social logic of space by Bill Hillier. You might know Bill Hillier. He developed a space syntax. It's a very well-known lab in UCL, actually. But that tool, that research, that kind of output of research actually does emerge from practice-based research by them kind of actually observing and contextualizing space and cities and how through looking space um, we can actually then generate additional research and innovation. So it's a really interesting pathway of practice-based research, but I'm not going to talk a lot more about this at the moment. And case study research, again, we usually have conversations with students about case study research. Not all of your work needs to be about case study research, but sometimes students see like a project and they are like, oh, this is really cool. This is a nice project that I would like to write about a little bit because I find it really interesting. That's not case study research, right? That's a precedent, that's some reference. It's good. It's good that you do it. Obviously, have a go at it. Go and have a look at different buildings or different projects or different types of innovation that might feed into your work. But case study research is really when you analyze case studies in depth and you usually compare them to learn something new about it, right? This is a very kind of interesting approach. Sometimes students do it, um, but usually the basic kind of understanding of case study research is that you analyze something in novel, interesting, innovative ways, and then you compare them and you learn something new out of it. The best example, or one of the best examples of case study research in architectural literature, is The Death and Life of the Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. It's very kind of Western, obviously, but Jane Jacobs is a brilliant theoretician, and this is really a great, great book. So if you want to, if you're thinking about, I would like to maybe do my research on the basis of looking at case studies, looking at other projects and analyzing them and talking about them, I strongly suggest you read this book by Jane Jacobs because it's a brilliant example of case study research. Okay. Do you have any questions so far? No? Are you there? Can you please thumbs up just so because some of you haven't talked and are still like quiet there on the background. Soleil, thank you. Susan, I know you are there. Yejun, you have a question, Yejun, or are you? Is this thumbs up, or do you have a question?
No, it's clear.
Okay, thank you, Han King, Binam. So a couple of you didn't react, so I think you might not be there, but so far let's just pretend and continue, okay? So from this, there are four. You know what? I'm gonna copy this in the chat window. If you give me a second, oops. If you give me a second, I'm gonna copy these approaches. You don't need to decide right now, but you can have a go at this. Um, these are the approaches that I have spoken to you about now. And what I need you to do right now is this. Is a really short exercise. It should take you about 5 minutes. Um, it's called a tiny text exercise. I need you to write these four sentences. Can you see this? Can you see my screen? The text written in yellow? Yep, cool. Um, I want you to write these four sentences. Well, instead of research, we can use literature review if you want to. I want you to write these four sentences about your own work. They don't have to be long. They don't have to be precise. Maybe you don't know yet what this is, right? But it's fine. Have a go. Have a first attempt at articulating from the reading you have made. This is what I would like to do. You don't need to show it to me now, but do it. Do it now because we will use this later. And and I want you to be able to kind of articulate this, right? Again, don't make it a very long sentence. And what I'm going to do for your benefit is also to copy this in the chat window, just so you can copy and paste the text for yourselves, okay? So I'm going to stop sharing. Let's take 5 minutes for you to do this, but I really, really need you to do this, and please paste it in the chat window because we're going to use this content for whatever comes next in our second half of this seminar, okay? Um, so I'm going to give you, no, you know what? I'm going to give you 9 minutes until 11, nice round number. So take your time, but please do these four sentences and paste them in the chat window, okay? We're going to check it in 9 minutes. Um, Again, I'm not assessing you. This is just workshop material. We're going to use this later on, okay? But I need all of you to please do it. It might be wrong, it might be vague, it might be unclear. It doesn't matter. Let's just have a go at it to see what comes out, okay? So you have 9 minutes. If you want to take the opportunity to go to the toilet or go make yourself a tea, that's fine. I'll be back in 9 minutes at 11, and we will continue with the second half of the seminar, okay?
Fat people disease you have.
另一边的皮特为了恶心布莱恩，已经变得彻底疯狂了。
We now return to BET-ET.
Don't you need to phone home?
Nah, I do it later. Brian Griffin?
Yeah, that's me.
Here you go. Oh, God! What's in the box, Brian? I got you good. I don't feel right. I want it back.
梅根的时日所剩不多了，普拉斯基已经成为了他的噩梦。
What's going on? Did that kid from the future come back? Oh no! Meg, are you okay? You guys, I've tried everything, but it's hopeless. He's going to kill me. I can already picture my funeral.
Thanks, didn't want to pay for the whole.
This is such a nightmare. At least I have you guys. I don't know what I would do without you.
Yeah, about that. Listen, Meg, we decided that maybe it's best if you don't talk to us anymore.
Yeah, we could be targeted by association. I don't want to get beaten up by a guy unless it's in a limo after prom. So, you're all gonna ditch me when I need you most?
Yeah, Meg, it's natural selection. This is how it works in the wild.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey there.
Hey, nice spot, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's great, especially because of that thing over there. You know what's in there? Corn.
Really? Wow, I could go for some corn.
You're dark, Raj. I don't care.
Good luck, Meg. Now, we must retreat into the shadows.
闺蜜们也抛弃了梅根， 孤立无援的他感到了前所未有的绝望。
What am I gonna do?
Sounds like you have a pretty big problem, Meg.
Huh? Mr. Quagmire? What are you doing in here?
This is my base of operations.
Mr. Quagmire, the girls' gym class will be in the showers in 20 minutes.
Thank you, Shirley. She's been with me 12 years. It's her birthday today. Didn't get her anything. Ugh.
So I guess you heard about the fight, huh?
Oh, yeah, they're talking about it in all the girls' bathrooms.
I'm so dead.
No, you're not. Because I'm going to help you defeat Mike Pulaski.
You are?
That's right. Be at my house first thing tomorrow morning and we'll get started.
Wow. Thanks, Mr. Quagmire. Well, I better get home.
What a good way to get around town.
最终，侧拍大神夸哥向梅根伸出了援助之手。
Okay, Meg, you got a bully problem and I'm going to help you.
But, Mr. Quagmire, why would you want to help me?
Because I was once in your shoes, Meg. I wasn't always the confident guy you see before you. You see, I too was terrorized by a bully. It was 1986 and the Cola Wars were at a frenzy. I was sitting in the RC section of the cafeteria when Tracy Bellings approached.
Why aren't you drinking Coke, you dork? Pepsi would also be acceptable.
It doesn't have to be a two-cola system. RC is what keeps the big guys on their toes.
You know what RC stands for, don't you? Chicks rule.
She was dyslexic. Anyway, that was the beginning of a long, abusive relationship. It's one thing if you put your penis inside out in the safety of your own bedroom, but to have it done in the cafeteria? To this day, I can't have sex with a woman against her will without thinking about rape. And that's why I'm going to help you, Meg. I never faced my bully. I don't want you to make the same mistake.
Okay, everyone, it's 11 o'clock, so please
Over the years.
paste your sentences in the chat window. Does anyone need one more minute? Oh, thanks, Susan.
Yes, please.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, let's give it 2 more minutes. This is useful, guys. This is an investment of time, kind of pushing you to write, and then this will help you get a starting point for your literature review. Okay. I'm gonna give it just 2 more minutes so we can continue with the second part of the seminar. That's really interesting, Susan. We're gonna have a quick chat about that in a little bit. Okay.
Yes, it's not maybe the final version of what I want my topic to be, but
It's fine. The
I'm
final
more-
version will not be in place until you submit, basically, and then it might still change after that during your dissertation. So never think about any of this as a final version. It's perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, everyone, you're 3 minutes over, so please paste your tiny texts in the chat window so we can have a look at them. Thanks, Sijian. We got 2 already. I'm going to copy them just because this is going to help me then plan our upcoming tutorials, by the way. I'm not assessing you on this. Don't worry if it's vague or unclear or you're not sure about yet. That's fine. We just need something to start a conversation, all right? So don't worry too much about it now, but do please create it so we can then talk about it. Okay, come on, everyone. We really need to continue. So please add your texts to the chat window so we can continue. Okay. Thank you, Vinay. Good. Has any of you that are pasting things on the chat window now not written your literature review yet? Is this the first bit that you write? You can thumbs up if you want to. Okay, so I'm gonna take that you've been writing anyway. Cool. So who are we missing? Sijian, you did submit something. Susan, William, I think we're waiting for you. We're waiting
Coming.
for
One sec.
Yejung. We're waiting for you. Han King, we're waiting for you. Sulei, Kian, Sekai, Yequan, we're waiting for you as well. So please, can you at least thumbs up so I know you are there? This is the issue with online delivery, isn't it? Like I don't know who's there, and if you don't turn your cameras on, I have no idea if you're still around or not. Okay, we're gonna then. Well, look, if you haven't done it, we will move on with the seminar. But if you haven't done it, I guess I cannot give you as much feedback. Really, you won't get as much help as others that have done it, because we will now refer to the ones that have been submitted. Okay. Oh, Vinay, you sent it to me as a direct message, but feel free to send it just so everyone can see it. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So we will move on from for now, but I'm a little bit worried. We only have 6 so far, 7 now. Han King, thank you. This work contributes to debates on I don't know. Well, that's fine for now. It's good to not know. We will sort it out. Don't worry. Okay, so we're gonna move on for now. Let's say Susan. Okay. Fabricated balloon. Mhm. Oh, William, there you are. William. Okay. I guess the first thing to note from a really quick overview is that always keep in mind that this submission is about, you know, architectural research and history and theory of architecture, right? You can talk about technology, but I would suggest you choose a way to talk about technology that is aligned with one of the approaches that we have just reviewed this morning. You can talk about technology from an historical perspective, from a theoretical perspective, from a case study perspective. If you don't do that, by the way, if you don't do that, you risk your research and your literature review becoming basically an outline of a technology. This is how it works. This is how it's good. This is how it's not so good. That's an evaluation paper, and that's not what we're looking for here because this is a module on history and theory of architecture, right? So I'm just putting it out there. You can talk about technology, and that's perfectly okay, but make sure that you talk about technology in one of the ways that we have looked at this morning, either an historical, is again in the chat window, historical research about technology, theoretical research about technology, cross-disciplinary research about technology, anthropological research about, and so on. So please make sure so maybe you can read and have a look at some of the references I just showed you this morning that maybe illustrate some of these approaches and think about how can I talk about technology? How can I talk about what I'm thinking now? Either AI, prefabricated manufacturing technologies, relationship between concepts. That's your case, Susan. It's a bit more theoretical. You're looking at concepts, right? The relationship between society and materiality. So that's a bit more theoretically driven, obviously. Same as William, you're looking at concepts, right? The discrete and automation. So you're not looking at a specific automation technology, but it's quite conceptual. But please make sure you drive this in one of these directions. Otherwise, it's gonna become a white paper of a technology, and that's not what we need now, and we're gonna struggle later on. So just make sure you step out of that sort of technology evaluation space, I suppose, right? Um, cool. So let me just we're gonna use this, by the way. I have copied all of your texts. Again, it might be a very drafty outline, but that's perfectly fine. Let me just share screen to move on to the next file. So typically, this is a file that I would share with you a bit later on. We would have usually 3 separate seminars, but I really want to accelerate your writing at the moment. And obviously, we're 1 week behind because last week, you were all busy with your design midterms, obviously. So we do need to catch up. So this is mostly about presenting your research and about how to start shaping your literature review in a very practical way, like things you can do to start dealing with your literature review. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about presenting your research, but there is a little bit of workshopy bit at the end of this that you will use where you will use the text that you have just sent me, by the way. So if you haven't sent it to me yet, please do so. But if you haven't, you will miss on the workshop we will do today, which I think will be tremendously helpful for you and for me as well, so we can plan our next tutorials. Okay. So these are the questions that you just answered, right? Or you tried to answer. What are you researching? What is the main problem, issue, gap? What is the thing you're looking at? Usually, and please take note of this in relation to the text you have just sent me. Usually, this is a problem or a gap or a challenge that you're dealing with. If you say, I'm looking into this concept, I'm exploring the notion of, I don't know, prefabricated systems, to say something. That's not a problem on itself. That's just a thing, right? It's a thing you're talking about. But what is the problem? What is the topic? What is the issue about the discrete, William? I'm looking at you. What is the issue about prefabricated system? What is the issue about materiality? Susan, in your case, you kind of suggest an issue there, right? You're saying in an increasingly digital world, we need to rethink what the material means, right? So that's a problem. That's a challenge. That's a research space you might want to look at. But when you describe what you're researching, you have to present it as in what is the challenge here, what is the gap, or what is the problem. It's not only about I'm looking at something, it's also about why and why that something constitutes a problem or a challenge that needs to be looked at. And then also why you are researching it, right? So this is your second sentence. The work argues that, yada, yada. Some of you had a go at it with a short sentence. That's fine, but usually this is the bit where you present that contextual grounding. This is the bit because this is something that I identified in the literature, because I've been looking at case studies, because I read this paper that identified this as a gap in current research, because I don't know. All right, because maybe my own experience as an architect, I've been working in these projects and I have identified that there is an issue on the way we look at these technologies, which is also perfectly valid, but you also need to support it with your literature review, obviously, right? Um, Maybe because there are broader cultural issues in the sector. So you have worked in different companies, you have been reading about it, and you have identified actually, you know what? These are my arguments, and these are the problems and the issues that I have identified, and this is the reason why I think this is a problem worth exploring or reading about or investigating about, right? So this is your second sentence, which is fine. In some of you, is like really short, but that's okay because I ask you to make it short because this is where you add all that contextual background information, right? When you talk about there's a gap here, there is an issue here, there's a project here, well, you need to reference it, right? You need to tell us where is this information coming from, right? Um, some of you wrote that as a bit of a statement. For example, Gia June, I'm looking at your sentence too. You said this work argues that automated construction and manufacture can have positive effects on urban renewal, or I'm interpreting this as urban regeneration projects, for example. That could be a valid argument. That's fine. No one's going to argue that. But where is that coming from? How do you know that? Right? It comes from literature. I've been reading these papers. It comes from my own practice. Maybe someone could argue the opposite. You know, when we automate construction, we are actually removing jobs. So there is less employment. So actually, it could have a detrimental effect on urban regeneration. So you could also make the opposite argument, but you need to document it. You need to back it up. You need to tell us where that information is coming from. And then the third sentence is how you are going to research it. What is your pathway? So some of you are saying will be conducted through anthropological research or work on effectiveness or work, this is exactly what we're talking about it this morning. What is your approach? What is your take? What is the method you're using to look into this specific topic, right? Um, so if you say, for example, I'm going to use a case study approach, well, in your literature review, you need to tell us which are your case studies, how are you going to analyze them, what is what you're looking into this. If you're looking at an anthropological perspective, why? Have you been reading Kevin Lynch? Have you been reading Stan Allen? Have you been reading these authors I just told you about this morning to help you shape that approach, right? So these three sentences, they sound fairly common sense. What are you looking to? What are you reviewing? Why are you reviewing it? And how you're going to do it? Well, that's basically your literature review, right? That's sort of what you have to do. But you need to really back it up. So you need to really evolve these short sentences into more concrete, developed actions of research. Okay. Obviously, when we talk about research communication, is we're talking about written but also verbal communication, and I think this is a good point for you to reflect about why and how you're communicating what you're doing, because this contributes to not only your literature review submission, but also for other drafts or any other written material, portfolios, curriculums, articles, research outputs. If you want to do a PhD, is anyone interested in doing a PhD after your master's? If I can see a thumbs up. No, I don't see like a yes, but I see. Okay, Vinay, you're interested in a PhD, so you will need to produce a PhD research proposal basically after your master's. So written communication is very important to you. And I see some resounding no's. I see you, CGN. Like there's no way I'm gonna study more after this thing, but that's perfectly fine. But again, online material, your final dissertation, narrative CVs, you need to write stuff and communicate your writing effectively, but also verbally and also beyond your masters, right? Design reviews and creates. If you feel like last week maybe it didn't go so well, maybe you need to work on the way you communicate your design, and you need to think about how to communicate ideas, complex ideas effectively. So there are many ways for you to think about that. But the four things I'm going to talk about you today is mostly about your literature review and really how you can start shaping your literature review as a matter of effective communication, right? We're going to talk about hierarchies. We're going to talk about clustering. We're going to talk about storyboarding. Well, we're not going to really talk a lot about storyboarding. There's a link I'm going to leave there for you to have a look at. And then we're going to talk about assertiveness and language. And then you're going to grab these things and you're going to update these four sentences you just sent me this morning. Okay. Hierarchies is an easy one, but it can take a bit of time to get there. This is a diagram of literature review made by a PhD student in our university a few years ago, and it was really interesting. He was talking about the social kind of logics of space. He was talking about um, uh, culture and the way space is a very culturally situated concept. So it's not certainly the same topic you're looking at. But I wonder if, from what you have been reading, you could articulate a diagram similar to this. I've been reading all these papers. This is how they connect, or maybe they don't connect. And hierarchy is a very important thing you will have to decide as part of your own work. Not every author is the same, right? Some of you might be more influential to you than others. So in this case, he identified actually Hamdi, Turner, Lefebvre, and Doreen Massey are the core four authors I'm looking at, and around them, I'm going to organize the rest of secondary literature review. By now, because you've been reading a lot, I can only assume that maybe you don't have a full diagram of all your literature, but hopefully by now you know, right? There are these two key authors that seem to be really, really relevant to me. There are these two key authors that are saying things that I find tremendously helpful for the type of work I would like to do. So you should be able by now to make a draft, obviously a smaller version of this diagram, maybe not that many names, but within that diagram, identify at least a couple of key authors. And news for you, you will do this today. So hopefully you have been reading, because if you haven't, you're going to be in a bit of trouble later. Okay, as in like in 20 minutes, right? So start thinking about what you've been reading, check your files, check notes, and I will ask you to produce a diagram that maybe doesn't connect 30 authors like this diagram, but maybe you've been reading about 10 and you have some notes and you can maybe connect them and identify these two seem to be the more important ones, and I think they are connected this way, right? Um, and the other one is clustering, right? Once you have this diagram, you probably can barely see it. There's a line here that is clustering a bunch of references saying, actually, when we talk about a topic like structuralism or post-structuralism or the deconstruction of space, this chunk of my literature review seems to be particularly relevant, right? So clustering is not really about creating hierarchies. It's not really about identifying two key authors, is more about identifying a common topic that connects them, right? So this means that you really know your literature, it really knows and understands how your literature connects to each other. You might not know about this yet. It's something that might be a bit of a work in progress for you if you haven't been um, reading too much, but I would suggest that you should be able to write your literature review to cluster references and literature around certain topics that you're going to discuss in your literature review. If you don't do this, by the way, if you don't have a clear hierarchy and you don't have a clear clustering of literature, your review usually reads like the Wikipedia page of your topic, right? So if you're going to talk about, sorry, going back to your topic, William, for example, automation and the discrete, what we don't want to read is the Wikipedia page of automation and the discrete. We want to see you being able to create hierarchies of authors. These are more influential. This is how they relate to each other. You're able to really understand what you're talking about, right? And so you should be able to construct this diagram first and to be able to find a clear hierarchy of more influential authors, and also to cluster those references around common ideas and topics, right? If you cannot do this, it means probably that you are not yet understanding or engaging with literature as deeply as we would expect from you to do, right? So yeah, you will have to, and then obviously you write about this and you explain how in this case, Doreen Massey or Henry Lefebvre are key references that help cluster some other authors around them because there are common ideas, common narratives, common themes, common topics, common concepts, right? That can help us understand the relationship between them. This is how you craft a literature review, right? This is really how you craft. If you can do this in your literature review and explain it with words in a clear, concise, effective way, it means that you have been reading and it means that you really understand what you have been reading. So this is a good grade if you're able to do this, basically. Keep in mind, by the way, we saw this last week. There are tools to help you understand the diagramming or how to cluster research literature, like Insightful. This is not writing the text for you, obviously, but it's a way to visually, quickly look into the relationship between different papers. So we saw this in our last seminar. So you can go back and look at those slides and look at those links. But remember, there is a tool out there that can help you articulate an early version of this. I think you should do this. You should do this diagram. You should be the ones explaining what these diagrams are about. But there are tools to help you achieve that. Okay, there are tools to help you navigate the literature and do that. Um, there is something about storyboarding that I'm not going to get into the details of, but literature review has to do with telling a great story. This is advice from Sarah Knowles. She has this really great blog in the London School of Economics about how to engage with presentations. This is actually about verbal presentations, but I think a lot of that carries into the way you write about your research and the way you're going to present your literature review as well. Um, so, start with your findings and your conclusion. Um, avoid uh, 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 too much detail about one specific bit of literature. We want to show that you are able to review the field of literature. So if you spend 1,000 words discussing a single paper, for example, it might become a problem. Always summarize every section towards the end. Make sure that you demonstrate that you understand what you're talking about. Summarizing things, synthesizing knowledge is one way to show that. You don't have a Q&A for this submission, obviously, but you need to practice writing, as in it takes time, it takes a lot of resource, it takes time to learn how to write academically at this level. So you need to draft and draft and draft and draft and draft, right? So that's probably the best advice you can get at this point. There's a lot of really interesting advice, and this is a blog, by the way, by the London School of Economics. There's a links to Sarah Knowles over there, but they have some other really, really interesting advice. There is a video here that we're not going to see today because I want to focus on you guys doing your actual work, but for you to see later, this is a video by Dustin Lance. It's a video made, it's a 6-minute video made by the Academy of Film of America, which they are the institution that gives away the Oscars. And he does a really beautiful video and a really beautiful narrative around storyboarding and how he uses storyboarding to do research around film practice, and how his storyboarding is not only a way for him to archive information, but it's also his method of research. So if you're thinking about storyboarding or the use of media in your own research, this video, hopefully you will find it kind of inspirational. For other examples, in terms of how to synthesize uh, uh, research in very kind of effective ways and how to communicate it effectively, one of the best sources out there is the 3-minute thesis competition by Vitae. That's an organization of early career researchers, and they actually make an award. They make a competition about 3-minute videos of people summarizing the research. So it's all about clarity, it's all about storytelling, it's all about really communicating effectively. And I think that would be very useful for your literature reviews as well. And the last one, be assertive. Assertiveness is important. And this is a key thing that we're going to pick up right now. Um, some of your text and your sentences. This is review explores something or argues something or investigates something or looks at something. Those words are very what we call soft verbs, because arguing something or exploring something can mean anything. How are you going to explore something, right? It's a very broad term in academic English. So usually we would ask our students to use more assertive and detailed words to describe what you're doing. So you're going to analyze something. Analyze can be a really broad word. It doesn't mean much unless you really contextualize it. So instead of analysis, you could say you're going to define, categorize, classify, compare, contrast, or systematize something. When it comes to, for example, synthesizing literature, which is something you will do in your review, well, how are you going to synthesize it? How are you going to structure your review? You could say, I'm going to combine something, construct, create, design, formulate, frame, merge something, solve, unite a field, or how you're going to evaluate something. You're going to reassess, I'm going to evaluate something, interpret something. The message here, make sure you use very assertive words to explain your research. When you say things like, I'm going to investigate something, I'm going to explore this topic, that could become a problem because that's not clear enough. So you leave a lot of room, a lot of space for interpretation. a really useful resource. I have highlighted it here, and I know I've been in your shoes, guys. By the way, I'm not a native speaker. I was an international student in the UK, so I really understand these experiences. Um, a really good source is the academic phrase bank of the University of Manchester, which I'm gonna show you very quickly here. How do I screen two? The academic phrase bank is a bank of phrases to help you structure research text. And again, there are some general language functions like how do you classify things. And if you go to that website and you click, it really gives you example sentences and structures as to how to write about these things, right? What are the action of research? Are you classifying a topic? Are you describing something? Are you introducing a list? Are you giving examples? Are you explaining causality? This is a really great, brilliant resource. And in each one of these subsections, you can actually open this up and it has a lot of example sentences to really help you articulate what you need to say. In your literature review, you will do a lot of referring to sources, which is here. So when you refer to sources, you can do all these different things. Reference to a previous investigation, stating what is currently known about the topic, for example. And if you click there, again, a lot of example sentences to help you articulate something. This is not really about the intellectual work, it's just grammatical structures. The ideas are still yours. These are just templates to help you move on through a literature space. So I don't consider this to be cheating or plagiarizing anything. And again, you might always then, as you move on with your research, change the phrasing of something or write something a bit more elegantly or a bit more creatively. But to begin with, again, what we're trying to do today is to kickstart your process of writing. To begin with, this could be a really nice, useful resource. Okay. Um, Back to slides. And this is your, as you might expect, workshop activity. So the first thing that I need you to do, and I have copied your texts, so I know, I know the previous version now. Adjust the wording of the text to reflect more assertive actions of research. So if you wrote something like, I'm going to explore something, I'm going to investigate something, please make sure you now use, whoop, sorry, some of these words, or it could be some other words, but some words that better reflect what is your intention, what is what you want to achieve with your research, and also construct a diagram connecting the literature you have read already and make sure you're able to consider either a hierarchy and a cluster of literature, right? What do you consider to be most relevant to your work? What is central to your work? What is peripheral to your work? And send it to me by email so I can use that material. I'm going to use these four sentences, the updated version of these sentences, and your diagrams to drive your next tutorial, actually, which will be a one-to-one tutorial with me where we will talk about the specifics of your literature review. But I do need this material because it helps me think about, right, this is what you want to do. This is how we can drive this conversation. So what I'm going to do now is to just copy this again in the chat window so you have it available. Um, you have it available on screen and you can do it. But it's 11:30, so we can spend a bit more um, than 15 minutes. You don't need to send it to me by email right now, but I would suggest if you send it to me by email within the next couple of days, I think it's fine. But I still want to stay in the call for at least 10, 15 minutes now in case you guys have any question while you start doing this. I don't want you to leave Zoom now and just stop doing this because I need you to have an actual deliverable at the end of this session. Um, is that okay? Is that clear? Yeah. Again, you might not have thought about this. It might sound a bit tricky and difficult and uncertain, but this is your starting point, and I need you to do it. Even if you take a risk or take a leap, that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly reasonable, and I will then help you, navigate this space. Obviously, a diagram is not something you can paste in the chat window at the moment, so feel free to do that either by hand, take a photo, use PowerPoint, use Word, use whatever tool you wish. I don't mind. Just send it to me. Um, at the moment, I am in Plymouth, so you can use my Plymouth address, or you can alternatively send it to me as an image on a chat in Slack. That's also Slack is always open on my laptop, so I can check it. I get the notifications right away as well. Um, and please do that. And with that, we're going to plan your next tutorial, okay? So I'll leave you with some time to do this, maybe 10, 15 minutes. You guys let me know if you need a bit of time or if you have any question. But does anyone has any question right now? No? Okay. Um, I know it's like a bit dry, do this workshop, write these words kind of stuff, but you do need to do it, okay? This is the kind of starting point, and it's something you really need to be able to articulate very clearly. So for now, let's leave it maybe 10, 15 more minutes, and we'll take it up from there, and then we will continue communication either via email or Slack, and then we will meet for tutorials, okay? Cool. I'll be back in about 10, and if you have any question in the meantime, you can just add it to the chat window, and I will pick them up in 10 minutes when I'm back. Okay, everyone. It's been almost 10 minutes, or a bit more than 10 minutes, but I haven't got any other question from anyone. So now that you have done it, hopefully, or you are in the process of doing it, has anyone got any specific question, maybe about your own specific submission?
Um, I don't know if this counts as a
Yeah, yeah, go on.
question, but it's just me brainstorming. Um,
That's
okay,
fine.
so based on what you said, that we should, or I should derive from, the technological part, or
Hmm.
the perspective of, in this case, discrete and automation. I don't remember that I read two readings from Henry I can't pronounce his last name, Harry Lefebvre or something like that, and then David Harvey, where they mentioned things about social economic context and social production space. I'm just trying to make some connection there. I just want
Okay.
to ask if you have any specific reading. I can't remember the name of that reading, but just want to ask if you
Well,
know.
I mean, obviously, when you say you're starting from if you're looking into the discrete and automation and you're looking at the social production of space, probably a very obvious first place to go to is Molly Claypool's work,
Mm,
because she has obviously done the work through automated architecture that looks into issues of participation and user engagement on the way we produce architecture through discrete approaches. So that sounds like a fairly uh, uh, common sense place to start. I wouldn't only start with her writing, which I think is in the reading list, but you
yeah.
can always search her papers on the university website. But also look at who she's quoting,
Mm,
because there is some other work in that kind of space that is maybe a bit broader. So she talks about the specifics of automated architecture, but if you go broader than that, you can probably find text like Mario Carpo's work around the second digital turn, for example. You can he doesn't talk about the discrete, but he does talk about technology in the ways which are socially grounded. Antoine Picon as well. Picon is his name, like this. He does some interesting writing about the balance between society and technology in the way we produce architecture. Again, he's a theoretician. He has written for many years, and he doesn't talk about the specifics of automation and the discrete, but it could be a good starting point for you. This is when you might go to Insightful, for example, and see how these two papers connect. Can I find a connection between Molly's paper and Antoine Picon's papers? And maybe then you will find some other literature that will help you ground that space. But that's true for everyone. Usually, when you start with a concept like, oh, I like this thing about the discrete, that's good. But what is it about the discrete that you are discussing? What is it about the discrete that you want to write about? Is it about architectural practice? Is it about social participation or how to stimulate social participation? Is it about maybe more speculative, creative, maybe artistic ways to look into the discrete or automation? So it's a bit up to you, really, to shape what that problem might be. I think that the discrete is one concept, but now you need to see how that lands within your literature review. Otherwise, it's too broad, it's too big, it's too much, I think, to summarize in one submission, frankly. But yeah, that would be my obvious place to start. I mean, Molly's part of UCL staff. You have all her work already accessible through the library. Um, so I would probably start there, really.
okay, thank you.
Any other question, anyone? Okay, so if that's fine, for now, please send me maybe before the end of day today. I'm not asking you to produce a lot. It's just like a quick diagram made by hand if you wish to, and these little four sentences, which you have done already. I'm just asking you to edit a few words from it. So it shouldn't take a lot of time from you. But what I would suggest is maybe before the end of the day, you can send it to me from Slack, for example, and we can then continue that conversation as we prepare for our next tutorial, which hopefully will be in a couple of weeks before everyone disappears for winter break. Is anyone planning? You're probably planning to travel or to go places for Christmas for the winter break, or are you staying in London? Yeah. Okay. Not sure. All right. Um, well, obviously, you deserve a break. You have been working a lot, obviously. So um, feel free if you're going places. Uh, we might know also of case studies or buildings or projects you might want to visit. So let us know if there is anything we can advise you on that front. But if you're also going somewhere, you're probably not going to be working a lot, but you might be reading a little bit. So if you want some travel reading that might relate to your dissertation, literature review topics, happy to advise you with that as well. But hopefully, I will see you face to face before you all disappear. Um, well, and if you're staying in London or traveling around the UK, also happy to advise on things you might want to do. And if anyone wants to come to the Southwest, you're always more than welcome. Let me know. We can meet here, okay? Um, so for now, let's keep this conversation going. I don't want to stop. I don't want to like ask you to forget about this for 2 weeks or something like that because I need you guys to start writing this thing, right? So let's keep doing this, and then let's send me something a bit later on Slack, and we can keep talking about it and then arrange our tutorial. Okay. I think is that. Do you have any other relevant design deadline or script or design review happening before winter break?
We have one on the 14th or 15th of December,
Right.
the mid-crit. But I also want to ask you, could you put today's slides on Slack so we can reference to a
Yeah.
diagram?
You know what? I'm gonna do it right now. I'm literally printing the PDF as I speak, so I don't forget about it. I'll put in there. Okay, so if you have I think 14 and 15th, is university still open the week after that, or is that the last week and then you close?
I think it's the last week. 15th is the last day.
Because that could be a little bit problematic if that is because that's Thursday and Friday, and then you're going to be busy with design, obviously, and then you're all going to disappear. So when would be the best date to meet in terms of so shall we meet the week before, Friday 10th? No, sorry, I'm in the wrong month. Friday the 5th, for example, to have a chat about your literature review. So then you have at least a week to then keep working on your design. What I'm a little bit concerned about is that design very quickly takes over all your life, and then you don't do anything for literature review. So then but I'm not saying this is gonna happen with you, by the way, but it has happened before. I go to London, do the whole thing, plan the tutorials, show up for the tutorials, and no one has done anything because you're all too busy with your design. So I want to find the best date possible for you so you're able to produce some work for your literature review so we can have a good tutorial. Um, is that doable? You think the eighth, which would be in a couple of weeks? Certainly, it's not going to be the week of the 14th because you guys are going to be busy with your design, right? Okay, no one says anything, so I'm just going to assume that that's going to be all right for you. So let's pencil. I'm going to confirm the specific date, but let's pencil for now either the 7th or the 8th of December, right? And then we will make a schedule, and then we will make a timeline for that in terms of who am I meeting when. Sorry, Susan, I'm just picking this up right now because I'm putting this on Slack literally as we speak, so I don't forget about it. Okay, so on Slack now. All done. So we'll meet in a couple of weeks, guys. But please, before then, hopefully today, send me the outputs from this little workshop activity because I want to know what you're doing before having a tutorial. And if you have any question that is an easy answer, a quick one on Slack, again, also please let me know because I do want to get you guys writing. I don't want you to close your laptop in like 2 minutes and then forget about this. Okay? Cool. Any last minute question or are we done then? All good? Okay. Well, nice to see you, everyone. At least the three of you that put the cameras on. And for the rest, I will see you, some of you, for the first time in a couple of weeks in London. Okay. Thank you very much. And I'll see you soon.
Bye bye. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.